upset.
Yeah.
And then the cat gets upset.
Makes so much sense to me.
And I send it to
So it's just like, we'll do the best we can.
this one I sent you long ago.
Mac, do you think we're ready to start? It is 5:30, or do we need do you need more time?
It'd be great if I could have about 30 seconds.
Tony doesn't
Okay.
have her number. Oh, no, sure. It's when she refused to treat her depression that she got really on her.
Am I still on here, Mac?
That would be
You know, we gave them a
Cool note, the following members are present or absent. Members of the public may attend in person or participate online at zoom.us/join, meeting ID 998-3576-7838. Once you log into the meeting, please use the chat feature to tell the moderator if you wish to speak to an item. More information is available in the agenda packet and on the city website. Now on to the agenda. Item 1, adoption of the agenda. The first item of the meeting tonight is the adoption of the agenda. City Clerk, does staff have any changes to the agenda? Okay. Do any task force members have changes? May I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
motion.
All right, and a second. Okay, moved by Donna, seconded by Shelley. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay and raise your hand. The motion carries. Item 2 is the approval of minutes from the March 30th meeting. Does staff have any changes to the minutes?
Nothing from staff.
Task force members? May I have a motion to approve the minutes? Okay,
One second.
all right. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Just to clarify, that was Albrecht
Yeah, moved by
motion,
Sarah.
Jensen second.
Yep. Seconded by Donna. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay and raise your hand. Motion carries. Item 3 is the review of outstanding questions. City staff, are there any updates to the outstanding items?
Chair, the only update that I have for this group is that the Title III, Chapter 1 liquor licensing was approved as recommended by this task force, or as submitted by this task force from the last meeting.
Thank you. Okay. There are no items for final review, so we'll move on. We're gonna continue with item 5, which is the review of Title III, Chapters 2 through 19, which is included in your packet tonight. That's the one that's printed vertically. We will not be doing a final motion on this, and I forget how far we got through
I think we got through page 9.
page 9.
There's changes that the task force discussed from last month that were incorporated that you find in yellow.
Yes,
Did
okay.
you wanna go through those? I think that unless you had any questions on those changes, we could probably continue on. I think we got through the end of page 9 there, and we started with 3-15-11-1.
Yeah, that is my recollection as well, because I remember the last thing we talked about was the windows. And that item has been stricken, J. So that takes us, as Michelle said, to 3-15-11-1, restrictions regarding sanitation, health, and safety. So if you're on page 10, kind of the flow I think that we'll continue with is give some time for people to look through the page if they have certain items that they'd like to address. Nancy?
Can I go back to item Okay, on page 9, did we decide we would not discuss any restrictions based on age? I thought we decided, I don't know, maybe 16 or something? Rather than,
I believe the direction was for staff to research what other cities were doing, and when we looked it up, it was very rare that another city had that restriction.
mention it at all.
Yes, most cities did not mention it at all.
Okay, I'm fine with that, just,
Okay,
I didn't remember talking about it that way. Okay,
thank you for bringing that up. Anything A through J? Okay, so let's proceed to 3:15:12, suspension or revocation. There was a comment that the rename section from grounds for suspension or revocation, it's been reworded for better understanding. So I think we look at A through D of the following page. A question that I have, are massage therapy, are they ever, would those establishments ever have licenses that allowed them to serve a controlled substance? Like
Not that I'm aware
alcohol?
of.
No.
Have you ever heard of that?
No,
I've never heard of that.
No wine and massage?
no, not allowed.
Okay. That could be a good business.
State statute, isn't it?
Yes,
Okay,
I do have one comment that
Yes.
it does happen.
does it? Okay,
It does happen that they may want to serve it, but when we've gone in on inspections in the past, it hasn't been present, we've had to order it out.
okay. Thank you.
But I don't even think they would qualify for a
Nope, doesn't qualify.
consumption and display, like where somebody could bring in their own drink or
That was
something. I
my,
don't think so.
just what I was gonna say, with that new display, would that be a business that would kinda qualify for something like that, or?
They would still have to serve food, so I don't think that that would qualify.
Okay. Let's proceed on to 3:15:12:1, the appeal process. This was updated to be consistent with the appeal process in the liquor chapter. And let's continue with 3:15:13 as well, which just has an updated section there. Question I have, has Burnsville historically had, I don't wanna be naive, but has Burnsville historically had any issues with illegal conduct in massage therapy businesses?
Yes, we have had some issues. Mr. Forsland, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, let's put it that way.
Okay,
Including up to license revocation.
okay.
I don't necessarily need to know details, but are we assuming it's not alcohol related?
Conduct unbecoming, shall we say, specifically prostitution charge.
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
I have a question.
yes.
So this appeal process and next section, is that kind of almost copied from the liquor
The appeal process, I believe, is copied from the liquor, but I don't think the right of inspection is from the liquor. I think it's unique to this.
Just because they're kind of similar in terms of appeal for, I mean, right of inspection will be very similar, isn't it?
I think it is similar to, no?
No,
Yeah.
Mr. Forsland does the inspections, so.
the appeals can be used for a couple different processes. What we're trying to build here is consistency for people if they want to appeal any action by the city, that they have some sort of remedy for it.
Yeah, no, what I meant is,
Right of entry has to do with if we have a situation where, let's say we have a complaint, we have something going on, we want to have that right to go and check, to make sure that they're in compliance with the local codes or the state or state codes.
thank you.
And this, the right of inspection is kind of a common provision in the massage license codes.
So is the right of inspection, is that an inherent right that the city has? Or is that a right granted by the fact that someone that has this license voluntarily submits to inspection?
Well, yeah, by nature of granting a license, you're submitting to the code, which is, again, the ability to let them come in. And remember, the way this section reads, this is during business hours, so it's not like an unfettered right.
Mhm. Thank you.
So this right of inspection, by applying for a business, almost any business, the city has a right? So, or is it specific to this one or two different businesses, or all businesses has the same?
This
any
is
up-
specific to the massage licensing scheme.
This one, yeah, is.
There's not an encompassing right of entry for every regulated business necessarily. Is that what you're asking?
No, what I was asking is that this is specific for this particular section.
Yeah, massage
Correct.
therapy.
Correct.
But generally, does the city or doesn't the city has a right to inspect any other, any other businesses?
Like, say, can the city go inspect Home Depot, which
Yeah.
isn't selling controlled substances?
Right. Or only for specific purpose? Just curious for understanding.
I would say that a lot of times it's not even necessary. We just call up the manager and say, hey, we got a complaint. We get them for like bathrooms inoperative. There's other entities that regulate other businesses too. Department of Health regulates restaurants, for example.
Yeah.
So it's not very common unless it's under a building code violation or something like that, that we would do that. If we were refused, we could go down the warrant road if we had to.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think it really depends on what kind of violation we're talking about. I mean, you could have a business that has a nuisance or a zoning violation, and maybe we get a call about that, and there would be an inspection, but it's not necessarily an inspection inside the premises.
So it's basically, it is business specific. Would you
In
say?
this case, yes.
Just from my understanding. I mean, this is fine as it is, but just trying to see how else inspection happens and whether this is already in the general.
We don't have a general business license, so that's not something that, some states do, some cities do, but we don't.
You don't. Okay, thank you.
Question that I have, number 3 says, with reasonable notice, the business records of the licensee, including income tax returns, et cetera, should be made available. What is reasonable notice? And then part 2 of that question is, in the suspension or revocation, A, it says that you can be suspended for violating the provisions, and if you refuse entry for an inspection, or if your employees have controlled substance, would not, I'm assuming that not presenting your business records in a timely manner would make you, would open you up to a suspension? Is that correct?
Potentially. I mean, that's a very fact-specific thing, whether or not an individual, depending on what records we're talking about and what the circumstances are. But yeah, I mean, any provision in this code that applies to massage licensing and the operation, if they violate it, there could be potentially subject to suspension. Again, just so everyone is,
Go ahead, finish your.
just so everyone is aware, of course, if you're subject to suspension, you're also subject to the appeal process that you have. So, there are the due process rights that are built in there for someone to bring their, claim if they think it's unreasonable in terms of the enforcement of the code to a hearing officer and then ultimately the city council.
Does, so, in it, it says tax returns, what's the purpose of that?
I don't ask for them. It'd usually be as a result of a police action, perhaps there's some crime being committed that involved tax revenues.
Does there need to be any clarification on what reasonable notice is, or is that just kind of generally accepted?
That's just generally accepted. I mean, again, that's gonna be sort of fact-specific. I think it's really about, what are you asking for? I mean, if you're asking for something that would take someone some time to put together, then asking them to produce it in 5 minutes is probably not reasonable.
Sure. Okay. That takes us through the end of 315.
Actually, chapter 16 was repealed, so yeah, so that would take us through what we started last month.
Because 17, 18, 19, 20 have all been, sorry, 17, 18, 19 have all been removed.
Oh, right. They've all been struck.
Any further, I know that we discussed this last time. I was curious if I could have, if we could discuss this perhaps a little bit more. We talked about on page 6, 315.10.1, persons ineligible for a license. And it's not my intention to spend a ton of time here, but we talked about what should the disqualification, be felony, or should it be sexually oriented, or should it be a crime related to the, I actually see that the proposed language has been convicted of a crime related to the licensed occupation. So never mind. Okay. My memory was wrong, so I apologize for wasting our time. If there's nothing else then for this packet, I think we will proceed on to our next item. Okay. Questions and comments from the task force is item number 6. So before we actually go to this packet here, we'll review any questions or comments from the task force related to chapters 20 through 22. Do the city staff or attorneys have anything to add?
Staff has added the comments to the city attorney's memo.
Thank you. Do any task force members have any further comments?
The response to a number of the questions is that things asked about food trucks, ice cream trucks are in chapter 30, which I can only assume we'll get to later.
Yep.
Because we're going numerically.
Yeah.
All right.
Get excited, it's coming.
Gotta keep track of those ice cream trucks.
Okay. All right. Then we will proceed with the review of Title III, Chapter 20 through 22. So I think we'll just kind of continue as we did, and this is the horizontal packet that we have before us, and kind of read through section by section for our discussion tonight. So, starting,
Ms. Lemke, if you'd like to come to the table, you can sit right next to Ms. Ward. Ms. Lemke's department oversees issuance of these.
okay. Welcome.
Sorry, Lynn, I know you're not Dan Pinter. He's coming next.
Maybe I should be.
He's coming.
I didn't know my thing was right there.
Incognito.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Glad to have you. We'll start with 321 1, definitions, which is on page 1 and 2. Any questions or comments on definitions? Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yes.
As we're going through these definitions, sometimes we're removing some of them that make sense to get rid of, because they're, like, the definition for person, we can probably get rid of that. We also thought the definition for regular business day was pretty clear, and wouldn't need be in there. So, as we were going through, we realized that, maybe we could remove those, and that's up to the task force if they're interested in it.
Okay. If there's, oh, you go ahead.
Just a question on the definition of peddler.
Okay.
The last sentence says, there are not stops or parked waiting customers to come to them. It's kind of, why is that there? Just curious.
Food trucks.
I think that Task Force Member Ward is correct. I think it's meant to distinguish it from situations like a food truck that might be parked in a parking lot. People come to the food truck. That's not what we're talking about in this particular code section.
So, in other words, if there's somebody in a parked car and standing there with some sign or whatever, this doesn't apply to that person. Is that kind of what you're saying?
They would be a transient merchant, I believe, because it says occupies any private property, vacant lot, parking lot, motor vehicle, trailer, structure, tent, or portable shelter. So I think it's just clarifying that they are technically a transient merchant, not a peddler.
Not a peddler.
Yeah.
Different definitions for different types of
Yeah,
sales.
so you're treating those kind of people separate from peddlers.
Maybe not actually treating them separate, but distinguishing them as separate.
Just trying to
Okay. Let's proceed to 3.2. Registration required. Nancy questions whether this applies to tree care companies who go door to door. None seem to have the requisite name tag. That's a good question. Would city staff be able to comment? Would registration be required for, your door-to-door tree trimmers?
I mean, if it's not covered somewhere else, I think.
Tree trimmers are licensed by the city. They're not registered. They actually have to have an operating license.
Okay.
Is that for operating business, but for going door to door and advertising their businesses, do they have to have any kind of an applicable license, or could they just, because basically what they do is they do the old, we're working down the block, and then they go up and down the whole block.
They should have. I mean, if you're operating a legitimate business, you should have identification on you.
So what part of the code would handle, is a tree trimmer a specific type of license you have to apply for?
Correct. If you're doing the operation within the city.
Okay, so if I go door to door with a chainsaw, doing business, I have to be registered as a tree trimmer?
You bet.
Okay, and do you know what, is that in Title III that,
Yep.
It's coming up.
It's
okay,
coming.
great, all right, I look forward to it.
So, Len, isn't there a difference between whether or not you sell goods or you sell service?
Yes. If you're selling something that you're handing to the person right then and there versus like taking orders for a publication or,
Magazines?
yeah.
That's different, but if it's just service, like I don't think that we require a license. I've seen people say, I wanna plant flowers, I'm soliciting for service. I don't think that requires a license, does it?
I mean, we have people that go around and like, I wanna look at your roof. They come and get a peddler's license.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Yep.
Okay,
It's a lot of.
Michael?
Yeah, when it
Might
storms.
be kind of a silly question, but I remember when I was a kid going door to door asking people if I could rake their leaves or wash their car or something like that for $5. How does that all qualify for like a kid doing something like that?
Or the Girl Scouts going door to door?
Well, I wouldn't even.
I'm not touching it.
It wasn't part of like an organization, it was just,
Talking about the Kool-Aid
We
stand?
send Chris out.
The lemonade stands,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Well, that's a good question. Would, maybe the city attorney care to comment on that?
Well, yeah, I would say that that's really not a formal business. It's just, you know, the, your neighborhood kid. It doesn't really fall under this. This is what we're talking about, someone who's, for one, you know, an adult, operating a business, or selling goods. Just wouldn't,
How would that differentiate, say, from somebody, I guess, maybe soliciting or something like that at like Home Depot, saying, oh, I'll, you know, I'll do your landscaping or something like that for $50 or something. Like sitting at Home Depot and, you know, waiting to get picked up to go and do something like that.
This is really meant for people going door to door or
Okay.
business to business soliciting. I mean, I
Gotcha.
suppose if you went from Home Depot to Target, down the row, that would be considered a solicitor.
Fair enough. In the definitions section, do we need to specify something for youth?
Yeah, I don't actually see any.
Boy Scout selling wreaths, Girl Scouts selling cookies, soccer clubs selling whatever.
Yeah.
Point of
Is that the non-commercial
clarification,
or advertising?
any organization that's a nonprofit doing sales, that, we're talking about the Girl Scouts, you know, the football club, those types of things, they have an exception in here.
Yeah, there's an exemption under letter B.
But generally, the kid with a lemonade stand is not a not-for-profit organization. They are a for-profit
Yeah.
enterprise. But more specifically, there's actually, I'm not seeing anything that clarifies that only adults, and maybe that's not important. Am I missing something?
But I think that unless we had some sort of a complaint, there would be no enforcement on the lemonade stand. If for some reason the lemonade
you
is
think city
making
council
people
can get
sick
behind
and we get an enforcement complaint, then I think it would be
The
handled
lemonade
differently.
isn't usually, I mean, they don't usually go door to door. Like,
Right.
do you wanna buy some of my lemonade? They usually have a little stand set up in their own yard, right?
It also comes down on that thing called a tax ID number. And unless they have a tax ID number and are moving all sorts of cash out, I'm not gonna worry about them.
Go ahead.
The only reason I kind of bring that up is I swear I remember seeing something that happened in Minneapolis where a kid was like selling hot dogs and chips or something like that. And they had to take away his stand and like fine his family or something like that.
That's Minneapolis, though.
I'm just saying, so I was just curious, like, what happens in this situation if somebody did that? And I think they did that on their property too, and they still got in trouble. Where they're, you know, had like a lemonade type stand, but it was a hot dog stand or something. I don't know if that's because it was cooked food, like considered cooked food or something that changed. the
Yeah,
whole-
what you're referring to happened nearby the state fair.
Okay.
Because the vendors who paid a lot of money to be there found that in competition, and we do have that, you're correct. If we're gonna do things, we're gonna do it safely. I was a health inspector for many years, and we'd rather turn it into an opportunity for education versus, you know, make them close up shop and pull the hot dogs.
That would be like a Minnesota Department of Health thing.
Exactly.
They have rules for stands and foods and things like that, so.
So I'll go back to it. Definitions, peddler. An adult person? And then are we done?
Matt?
I think we could argue that a 16 or 17-year-old may have a legit peddler's or business. So I don't think we should limit it to just adults.
Or they may work for a company,
That
like a summer
routinely
job,
they-
going out and doing this.
They have teenagers or college-age kids that help them with their business, selling magazines door to door, that kind of thing.
I just generally don't think that there's much confusion that kids who are selling lemonade on the corner or even door to door in their neighborhood are gonna fall under this, or we've had complaints about kids. I certainly haven't seen complaints about kids in all the cities that we represent, so I don't know that we need to specifically address that in this code.
Shelley?
I think that the appropriate response would perhaps be to detail an exception. We've talked about peddlers and transient merchants under the same umbrella here, and they're really treated differently. I think perhaps if we really feel strongly about it, we could carve out an exception to clarify, to prevent litigation in the future, since things have become more litigious in recent years.
That would certainly be something we could do. It appears to be maybe not something that's necessary.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this may not fall in this category, but quite often, representative comes to businesses. Think of a common one, it's like a medical representative. I don't know whether they do that anymore. Go to different businesses and services, and when I was working there, there used to be some products being peddled by businesses. And the salesman will come and talk to us about a certain product or services in a business situation.
I think that's actually a solicitor by the
It's a
definition.
solicitor by definition, not a,
Yeah.
okay, not a peddler, okay.
Okay. So I'm not really sensing a need to dive into the lemonade stand topic further. So exemptions, there's a couple of clarifications. One clarification, you'll see the addition on 323A that obtain a special event permit. And then B, I don't know if that has been replaced in its entirety or just the city council has been capitalized, but an exemption for civic, religious, and charitable organizations.
Moved places. This exemption.
Yeah, it was at the end
It
before.
this was just moved from a different section in the code.
Gotcha.
To this location.
Thank you. So that'll take us to 324, registration.
Can I ask one question, please?
Sure.
The civic, religious, and charitable organizations, I'm assuming, but it's not spelled out in there, but that would include more and more fundraising is going on through sporting events, through booster clubs, are the sporting booster clubs exempt in this one?
Yes.
And are those booster clubs, just as a technicality, are they required to be a 501c3, or can they just be called the booster club?
I think it's 501c, anything after
Okay.
that would be nonprofit. If you have a nonprofit status, you would qualify under the exemption.
I mean,
So if you didn't, maybe this isn't correct, but I'm assuming the Vikings are not, say, a 501. They're a for-profit enterprise. So they would not, an organization like that, they would not have an exemption even if it could be
Typically
for sports.
youth sports organizations and other nonprofits.
Okay. So that takes us to registration. A couple of changes we see regarding the photo ID. Any questions, comments on registration?
I'm just curious, do people do this? Actually? Register with the police department? Once in a very great while, I'll see fundraisers. They appear to be employees of, I'll just pick an environmental organization, and they'll have, all sorts of name tags and blah, blah, blah. But most people who come to my door do not have that. So I guess I'm just curious if this is a well-used part of the city code, or if most people are ignoring it, or they just are all coming to my house.
It's probably a combination of all of those things. I mean, we do get complaints that somebody is out peddling or soliciting without a license. And then we require them to be licensed if we find out about that. They're supposed to we give them a name badge, and they're supposed to be wearing it in a obvious place.
So even these tree trimmers who are coming with their little card to hand to you, they're licensed, I assume, to do tree trimming, but I don't see any photo ID.
I don't stop them. That's up to our forester when they run across this. If they're out going door to door, then it's an action of the police department.
The police department
Yeah.
does the enforcement on this?
Well, if they get a complaint from somebody out, say 7, 8 o'clock at night, knocking on my door, they're not identifying themselves, I'd call the cops.
I mean, I'm just curious. I'm not gonna turn in every poor sap who comes to my door. They're usually not in the most, expensive trucks and that sort of thing. So I'm just curious if anyone actually registers in order to go door to door to try to
I hope so.
Yeah.
hustle up business.
How many registrants do you know?
I
Is it
should've
hundreds
looked
or
that up
dozens?
before I came, but I didn't.
Okay.
I mean, we issue quite a few every year. I mean, it starts getting busy this time of year when the weather starts warming up. I don't wanna guess a number, but quite a few.
Okay.
We have this happen a lot too after storm events, for example,
Yeah.
as we all probably have endured more than once.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just suggest that they follow this code next time.
Usually I'll ask them, like, do you have your city permit, and they'll just kinda, some of them will go, I didn't know about that. And I work at a business here in Burnsville too, and if they walk in without it, we won't even talk to them. Like, if you don't have it, go see the city hall, then you can come back.
Okay.
Okay, any other items for registration? Okay, let's proceed to, next page, fee, and I think just probably the whole, 5, 6, 7, and 8 together. Any questions, comments on this? Okay. So that takes us to 9, practices prohibited. So it looks like there's an exception in A, and I had a question about D, about the rule about sundown. Is that just generally because people don't like people coming to their house after dark, and that's fine? Okay. Any other questions or comments on prohibited practices? No?
Chair, did you want to see if the other members had an appetite to change the timing?
No, I think, I will withdraw that unless someone else has a strong passion for late night solicitors. Nancy, perhaps? Okay.
I have a sign on my door that says no solicitors. Yeah, but it says children with fundraisers welcome.
E, yes.
Oh, I want to knock some doors with kids in
How does
there.
the transient merchants come into this picture here when you're talking about vendors? Just curious.
How does a transient merchant come in? Can you say that again?
Yeah, we are trying to define peddlers or, okay. Peddlers, solicitors, and transient merchants. Okay, I'm sorry, yeah. It's in that, I think it was only about peddlers first. No problem.
Okay. Other items? No? All right. So the rest of the page, registration period, not being transferable, let's assume there's nothing there. The revocation and denial of registration. Any questions? Looks like there was a change to 14 days on point D, which is page 6.
Chair, that's just, again, this, and we may, I think I'm gonna recommend that we change this to appeal, because this is the same, we're trying to make that appeal language the same in every chapter. And somebody did change this, but we noticed that it didn't, the days didn't get changed from 10 to 14. The title should also be appeal.
Okay. I think, the city making that change, generally, I think we're all in agreement. It sounds great. So that takes us, to, and actually, where's the penalties section? Is it just that you lose your license? Cause I wasn't seeing a penalties section specifically for transit merchants. So, is there no penalty?
Well, it would be the revocation, or suspension, but it would also be subject to the general, language that we have on misdemeanors. Any violation of the city code is misdemeanor.
Okay.
But generally, for things like this, what we're talking about, a license, the remedy is really suspension of that license, or revocation of that license.
Okay. And I don't see the application fee listed, and is it just a general application fee, or I was kind of confused by that?
The fees are listed in a different section of the code, but, they're not listed in, none of the fees should be listed in here specifically. We did have some certain language, but the general fees that are set by the council every year are done during the budget process.
Okay.
I would also like to make a comment about F.
Yes.
That's where the appeal comes in. We want to combine that language with that hearing in D.
Thank you. A question that I have is A4 and the revocation. It doesn't have a time box on it. We had a discussion about that with regards to massage therapy and I think actually liquor licensing of something like 5 years. Would it make sense to have a time boxed limitation to say, if it was 5 years ago, then you can try to get a solicitor's license or a peddler's license?
Is there a frequent amount of people who get revoked and then keep coming back and then get revoked and?
Usually.
No, okay. It's not like a little hot list
Depends
you
on-
have of like, oh, they're back.
Steve?
I agree with you. I think in general, we want to be the kind of community that allows people that have had an offense after a reasonable amount of time to go pursue whatever activities they want to pursue. We'll assume they've served their time and they're reformed.
Question, isn't that generally covered in a criminal background check being time limited? It wouldn't be beyond 7 years that any criminal behavior would be considered or be allowed to show up on that?
No, it shows up.
Doesn't?
Nancy?
When we're talking about time period, I think, as you were talking about, we might want to be careful about the language as to whether it's 5 years from conviction versus 5 years from end of, if you want to use the term sentence, or what other else might be appropriate. And then you get into the issue of, for instance, with voting rights, is probation, if you're on probation, are you done or not? I mean, there's a lot, I used to work for the courts, there's a lot of discussion about whether serving your sentence means just physically or you're in a prison and then you're not, versus if you're under supervised parole, as most of us know it as. Yeah, I'm all for this, I just don't want to have people let things through the cracks that they didn't anticipate when you talk about time. Time from what is, you might want to be very clear about that.
Shelley?
For legal reasons, would it be better not to list a specific time in there, but just to state something reasonable and utilize the appeal process rather than trying to encapsulate and getting the city embroiled in lawsuits over whether it's 5 years after this, that, or the other thing.
What does the city do for alcohol licensing, which is probably our toughest license? Is it just, because I believe I recall a time box to it, it wasn't just forever.
Top of my head. I have to pull it up. I don't remember.
Hold on.
I think generally, I would say that while the appeal process is there, I think we've had discussion that an arbitrator has to follow the rules, and if the rules don't make an exception, then the arbitrator agrees that there is no exception, and that therefore there is effectively no appeal.
Didn't we say at the discretion of the city manager or something in the other sections? So there is that discretionary piece. I think that was how we addressed it.
Jared, were you gonna say something?
Well, I can't remember the discretion of the city manager, what section that was in, but I think if we're talking about really, generally the task force wanting to have a time limit, I think it's best to do it, and certainly we want to mirror the liquor license statute if we can, but, I mean, it seems to me that you would do it from like conviction, so one finite point in time, there's no question that you're gonna be able to pinpoint what that point in time is, and then it's within whatever that, whether it's 3 years or 5 years or whatever the task force recommends. I don't see any problem with that.
Okay. I mean, I personally would support the idea of 5 years from conviction, partially for the reason that I think that this is, back to Nancy's point, if people want to avoid the statute altogether, they probably will, and the risk is considerably low, I would say. And, you know, if someone's only been out of prison for a year, there's frankly probably not many jobs they can get, if we're being honest. So why discriminate against a very easy job for people who have made those decisions? It doesn't, you know, it's not like massage therapy where they're having hands-on contact. Michelle?
I'm happy to add that same exclusion or exemption clause that the city manager at their discretion can make an exception. Because if it's somebody who wants to sell magazines door to door, if they had, you know, a carjacking 5 years ago, is that really something that we need to address? Is that something we feel like is concerning for somebody who's going door to door? And I don't know if the answer to that is yes or no, but they could, at their discretion, maybe, or maybe somebody who was not actually doing, but just happened to be there in a stolen vehicle and ended up getting into more trouble than, you know, that those exceptions could be made if they were warranted.
We're more likely to encounter a situation where we don't get the information either, you know, if we ask them. So it's good to have that discretionary portion of it. We may ask for further information from an applicant too. So we have a couple checks and balances that are in place here by the time we get to actually saying, no, we're not gonna issue this license because of this.
I have a question. Could the city be held legally liable for licensing an individual who had, say, previously committed murder, was granted a license too soon, and murdered somebody while they were out selling goods and found a vulnerable person and entered their home? I don't know. I mean, cities get sued for ridiculous things nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a hypothetical that I can't really respond to. I mean, the question of whether or not we will get sued for something
Versus
whether or not we would be liable, or whether or not that claim has any merit. I think, generally speaking, again, we have the code standards, we follow the code standards that we've set, and that's kind of our touchstone. So, I mean, if we license someone and they go out and commit some heinous act that is not necessarily connected to, you know, whether or not they met the code.
So is there, oh, sorry, Donna?
Yeah, I like the discretionary because I know, years ago when I worked in Apple Valley, I had a peddler at my door to door, and, you know, he was soliciting for magazines or whatever else, but then the next question was, oh, are you married? Whoa, okay, my next call is 911. Oh, you wouldn't do that. Well, my office was in my apartment, So this person is already at me, so we appreciate that discretionary for them to be able to look further into it than necessarily we could, because you just never know what you're gonna come across on who it is or what's gonna happen. Let me tell you, that individual ran, because I did go for the phone. Didn't have a cell phone, just had to go over to my office phone. But, you know, those kind of things, so I think that's a good thing to have in place, because you have a team already built here that's not gonna be doing personal bias. They already know and have the backing for here's where we make those decisions. So I think that's important for a community. I mean, it doesn't solve everything, it doesn't protect everything, but it's another layer there saying, hey, if you're gonna do this, you gotta follow all this stuff, and most of the people that shouldn't be in it, aren't gonna. So I think that exception is a good thing, like the other one, to have in there.
So kind of looking for consensus. Are we looking for specific language with respect to years?
I would say to make it with the city manager discretion, the same as the other.
Okay.
The conviction piece, is that what we're?
We're still, make sure we're still talking about number 4, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I would support consistency of language for all criminal background check related activities throughout the entire code, rather than trying to determine which ones need to be time boxed and readdressing this every time.
Were you able to find with the liquor license?
I'm looking at it right now, and it's not coming up to me, and I don't know where we had it.
Okay, then maybe I could suggest that since we have handled the liquor license one and it has gone through, that maybe we just say,
Similar
can you make
to-
it similar?
And I think we did massage similar as well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I think we're agreed there. So I think that takes us to 2013, transient merchants prohibited exceptions. Oh, I'm sorry, Nancy.
I have a question about item F. On the
Yes.
appeal of a license being suspended or revoked, that can go to district court? That
Michelle?
seems odd.
Before we had our appeal process, that was their
All right,
way to. So my recommendation was to combine that with paragraph D above with the hearing,
great.
Okay.
and that will be reflected in when we
Okay.
come back.
All right. So 13, transient merchants prohibited items. I do have a question. It says that they shall conduct business in accordance with the zoning and/or other applicable codes. With regard to zoning, a transient merchant can have a business of delivering goods, so that would potentially take them anywhere in the city. Is there something I'm missing about the zoning aspect to this title? Like, are we saying that if there's a parking lot in a residential neighborhood that they can't set up there?
I mean, unless they had a conditional use permit, but I don't know if that's even possible to get one in a residential neighborhood.
Chair, I'm just trying to think of any situation where this happened. This was not my comment, and I'm guessing that the planning and zoning folks added this in here. What I'm thinking is that there may be some situations where somebody's on, got a certain PUD type thing that would not allow this type of service. I don't know. Is there any clue on that, Jared?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I mean, obviously, the section C talks about zoning requirements, so A to me is just a catch-all. We can't always predict what kind of scenarios come up. We get a lot of different things that happen. So, I mean, it really is a catch-all in terms of what kind of zoning violation that may occur. But C is really the biggest piece here in terms of the regulation.
Okay. Go ahead.
Just a sentence structure issue in the first line. Transient merchants shall only operate, or is it better to put that only, shall operate within the city only under the following? Probably that's a legal question, I don't. The way it is written, it confused me first.
It's more of a grammar question, I think.
Grammar question,
so-
yeah. I like the, having the only just before under. That is, shall operate within the city only under the following circumstances. Does that
I
make
think
more?
it's better the way it is.
I agree,
Yeah.
it's better the way it is, yeah.
Yeah.
That is the,
Okay.
that's a typical sentence structure for writing, I believe, but I'm not an expert if somebody is.
Yeah.
Michelle?
As the members may have noticed, that the staff is looking at trying to, when the code says you shall not accept this, we're trying to change that around and make it, this is what's allowed, and not, instead of coming with a negative, from the negative perspective, we're trying to flip that around so it's a little, because it can get confusing when this is not allowed except when and this, and so we're trying to make it clearer and easier to understand by putting it in a positive note rather than the negative side.
Yeah, it's the way people normally talk.
Right.
Which, to that end, Chair, maybe the title of this, it says transit merchants prohibited, which the prohibited was because of that odd vernacular. I think we can just rename this one to transit merchants, semicolon exceptions.
Exceptions.
That works.
All right. Any other questions? Michael?
It's not really a question, it's more of just the, what is it, C6, just the ADA parking thing. I mean, ADA is the federal, regulation, but Minnesota has its own, it's just considered accessibility code, so it'd be like accessible parking.
Right.
And I don't know if it's a
The
big deal, but I
ADA
mean.
is the Americans
It's
with
usually,
Disabilities Act.
from what I know of in Minnesota, typically the vernacular is accessibility when it comes to stuff like that.
Do we like accessible rather than ADA?
I think I like accessible.
I do.
Because I think it would fit more with the Minnesota code and everything like that too.
There was a question provided by public comment regarding the city limiting the number of solicitors that are allowed per day to minimize the number of roof vultures that circle after a storm. So in the roof type scenario, are those considered peddlers? Okay, and so they generally would have to be licensed by the city? Okay. And does the city make any sort of limitations on the number of soliciting licenses generally or for certain items? Okay. All right. I think that takes us through the end of.
Can I ask one last question? If I'm a business owner and I wanna have a license, and I'm gonna send, Bob and Jim out, peddling for my business, am I getting one permit for my business, or am I getting two peddlers permits? For each employee, so each person coming around, so the valid excuse, an invalid excuse would be, oh, my boss has it, but yeah, we're covered. Got it, thank you.
And I guess likewise, if there's two people that come from a company, I assume they must both be licensed and both show ID? Okay. So I think that takes us to chapter 321, gambling. Yes.
I can make a general comment about this chapter, and that is that gambling is by and large licensed by the state, but there are certain aspects of it where the city has to sign off on it. So there was some things that we didn't feel that were necessary in our code, and we asked for them to be removed.
Okay. And it appears that really the only thing that's left in the first section is gambling may be conducted by a qualified nonprofit organization. Applying for a premise permit must, and it leaves just one item, which is B, have a principal office located within the city or within an abutting city for at least 18 months prior to application. Principal office means the organization must have its registered office. I assume that's what that means. Must be registered. Okay, if required by the Secretary of State. Okay.
Question,
Yes.
does it cover the lottery? Lottery ticket sales and all the gas stations?
So these are for like premise permits, so if you go to Clive's where you have the pull tabs, so stuff like that, instances like that.
So lottery ticket sales aren't regulated?
Not by the city, by the
Okay.
state.
And so like when you see those lottery tickets at,
Speedway or.
I'm at the gas stations, or you can buy lottery tickets at Cub in that little vending machine, those are regulated by the state, the city does not have to sign off on those. Specifically, what we do is, we license establishments to have pull tabs. And the council has to adopt a resolution allowing them to do that before the state will grant them their license. We also have to sign off on any, what they call gambling occasions, which is typically a nonprofit, of some sort that is conducting some sort of fundraiser.
And is there a limit to the number of times they can do that in a year?
What was it? I forget what it is. It says it in state statutes. We changed it to reference state statutes because ours was more limiting. That was that 3-day, 5-day.
Yes, yeah, we did, yes.
Did it go?
I see the top of page 11. There's that one. Well, that was,
That's been stricken, so.
right, no, all of it's been stricken because, we just wanna be, we will just comply with whatever the statute says. If the legislators, amend it so that they can have more or less, then we just follow statute. That way we don't wanna be more restrictive than the state. And so at any given time, we just have to follow whatever the statute says.
So for example, hockey bingo at Fire Muster, they don't have to come to the city now and say, we're gonna pull a gambling permit for that, or that's the one they do, and I'm a little bit confused now.
Oh, they still have to get the gambling occasion permit,
Gotcha.
but, we're not limiting how many times, if they had 5 fire musters a year, we're not limiting it
Okay,
to
thank
3.
you for the clarification.
That
Got it.
type of thing, or if the fire muster board had extra fundraising events, whatever the statute sets the limit at, we're just letting it be state that dictates how many you can have of these a year, and not the city being more restrictive.
Very good.
Okay, and then, I guess just through the rest of the chapter, city approval required, investigation fee and penalty. Any other questions? Okay, so that'll take us to 322, local lodging tax. There was a question by Sarah on 322-2 Does it need to be stated exactly 3% for the lodging tax, or can we say the maximum percentage allowed by the state instead? Does the state's max allowable tax amount change frequently enough to restate it this way? And we have
Thank you.
Dan, who is the interim.
Truth man.
Welcome, Dan. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to answer the question, you could set it if you were so inclined by the maximum percentage allowed in state statute. It's worth noting, though, that if that were to happen, much like the city clerk already mentioned, if the state were to modify the tax, let's say increase it, then the ordinance would allow basically for the tax to increase as well. So the question would be, would the board, excuse me, the task force and the council be comfortable essentially an increase in taxes being on kind of automatic pilot? As far as how often it's changed, and looking at the revisor statutes, it looks like the last time it was amended was in 1990. So it doesn't appear that they've fiddled with it too much.
Do you know what it went from into? I assume it went to 3%, but do you know what it went from?
At this point in time, I wouldn't know. I could look at the individual revisor change, but we would have to.
Steve?
I don't even know if that one changed as a part of that revision in statute, if they've touched the amount.
Would this tax include rental by owners or VRBOs, Airbnbs?
The definition does include the short-term rentals, so it would be applicable.
So the city's collecting tax from individuals that are renting their houses out.
I'd have to look at this point in time, I don't know.
Let's make sure that happens.
I think we have maybe one or two licenses and that's it in the entire city.
Yeah.
I have one right next to me.
Do you?
Yes.
Okay.
Steve, I'll tell you that, yes, they are,
Okay.
and there is only a handful that have registered with the city.
Nancy?
Why do we have a local lodging tax?
Because we're the government.
It's for marketing,
Like we
for
want-
hotels and restaurants, bringing tourism into the city. It was set up to help the hotels and the hospitality industry.
And the lodging tax that we collect goes to fund the Burnsville Convention and Visitors Bureau, which Experience Burnsville markets our city.
So we want other people to pay that rather than citizens of Burnsville, basically?
Say that again?
We want people who are visiting the city to pay for it rather than citizens pay for it?
Well, the lodging tax brings in tourists, and so that was set up by the state of Minnesota years ago to help the hospitality industry itself.
I've just never been a fan of any tax other than a general tax that the appropriate elected officials stand on, rather than, 2% here and 3% there and 4% there. So,
Does the city know the gross revenues from this tax?
We do. Are you looking for just the previous fiscal year, or?
Yep.
Maybe a pre-COVID fiscal year as well.
Yeah.
Just give me one amount. Looks like the adopted budget for last year was about $270,750 in tax. I can tell you from previous years, 2019, the total receipts were $351,960, and they've been in the $350 to kind of $390 range going back for several years after that. Previously, they were below $300,000 in 2014.
So, what is the total amount of tax that the city brings in a year? I mean, is this like 1% of our total revenue, or is this,
Across all taxes, it would be less than 1%, I would think. I can do some math real quick.
About right, 1%.
because we have like is it $100 million budget?
$100 million in total expenditures and revenues. Property taxes for the current fiscal year are right around 41 million. then the question would be how you would construe other taxes such as franchise fees and whether or not you'd want those included in the calculation. So there are a few ways that you could calculate it ultimately. If it were you doing it as just a function of the property tax levy, if we did like the 2019 number, give me just a moment here. I'm just gonna do an approximation.
While he looks that up, there was a shortfall at the Ames Center, correct? 40,000 or something? Does the hotel, the 3% cover that loss?
That comes from a different fund.
Okay.
The approximate 0.9%.
Okay, so considerable.
Well, yeah.
Go Dan. Go Dan.
If it is covered by the state, then should we say 3% or should we just say whatever the state says the limit or whatever?
I personally think that for us to say whatever the state says is inherently just, I doubt the tax will change because it had to go through the state, but if it does, then the city would just be adopting it, and I don't think from the few council meetings I've watched that they would just probably carte blanche decide to adopt the tax. I think they'd have a lot of discussion about it.
Pretty sure of that.
So, and if it did change, they certainly could change the law, so I personally think that we should just leave it at 3% and not tie it to the state.
Yeah.
And not seek to eliminate it, because it sounds like it is, funding necessary programs in our city.
Yeah, I've been at the meeting with the visitor bureaus once with the council on that, and there is a lot of stuff that I had not a clue what they were doing and how it worked, and so there's a lot that goes on in the background, and it's not cheap to get people to know about Burnsville and stuff, so it's kinda nice that this is going for the people that are bringing in. So it's kinda nice that it's being used for that, as far as the logic goes, from people coming to here and getting more people here.
Maybe they don't wanna come because they have to pay 3% tax.
Yeah.
Try Minneapolis.
Yeah.
I know, I'm going to Houston in a couple of weeks. I know
We're
about
actually pretty cheap.
fees and taxes
Bloomington's
and,
twice
yeah,
as much as we are, I think.
rental cars, I don't
Aren't they
know.
like almost 10% in
$2,000.
Bloomington?
So, can you clarify that statement? So does the state law give it up to 10%?
You can go, no, it doesn't go up to 10%, but you can go to the legislator for exemptions and get that.
Okay,
There are special deals with the legislators going on in cities all the time.
gotcha. Thank you, Dan. Well, I think, yeah,
I
Michelle,
just wanna make sure we have consensus not to change the language.
that's what I'm seeing is a consensus.
Agreed.
Okay. So that would, I think that takes us through imposition of a tax, and then, I'll just put on the table the collection, the payment and returns, all of pages 14 and 15. I'm not seeing any comments in the margins or any substantial changes. Questions on the balance of page 14 and 15? Michelle?
Just one little minor, under 3-22-7, the last inserted line there, where it says, in determining the accuracy of a return filed under this ordinance, I'd like to say this section or this chapter or something like that. Because if we refer to the ordinance, this ordinance that we're adopting here can be changed by future ordinances. So I just want to be consistent with how we reference that. I have a couple of overall things too I'd like to
Please.
talk about for this chapter, if we're ready for that.
Matt, can I ask you a real quick question? As I'm reading with this insert on the, relying on the Minnesota sales tax return, because I don't know if you guys know this, but if you go more than 30 days at a hotel, you no longer pay a lodging tax. And with what's been going on in our society, a lot of our hotels are doing a lot of long-term. One of the reasons you're seeing kind of a decrease as well is because people are staying longer than 30 days, and that tax no longer applies. So how do you determine through their tax return, their sales tax return, that it was a beyond a 30-day revenue?
Sorry,
Just
Councilmember
trying to figure that
Gustafson.
one out.
I'm gonna have to lodge this one over to the finance.
Let's talk to the man over there.
too. So it's not necessarily to say that the city would always use that information, it's just to make it apparent that the city would have access and would use that information in the event that there was an investigation. It's just another resource for the city to understand if a taxpayer was paying the appropriate amount of tax.
Thank you. Michelle, you wanted to point out some other changes just generally in the statute?
Just for this chapter, there was a couple of definitions that I thought we could get rid of in here. If you see the definition of city, I think we can remove. And the definition, is that the only, yeah, I think the definition of city is the one we were looking to remove. I think we're pretty clear on that. And we're trying, because if you took this chapter by itself, I could understand, but because it's part of the whole city code, I don't think we need to define city in every chapter. And then overall, I'm wondering, this is, Title III is on licensing, and this is not really a license. So should it be in a different chapter, is what I'm posing.
Is there a section on taxes?
Maybe that's why it ended up in this, I don't know. Jared, do you know why it would be in licensing?
I don't know, well, I could guess that, you know, we do have we have the short-term rentals, we have the rental licensing, so maybe it's somehow tied to that, but sometimes we just see things ending up, you know, hey, there's nowhere else to put it, we have an open code section and
Okay,
where it goes.
if, we'll maybe take a look and see if there's any other more appropriate place for it to go. If we find that before the next meeting, we'll let you know. That's the only comments I had other than that.
And on 32212, use of proceeds, it says 95% of the proceeds must be used basically for the Convention Tourism Bureau. So that is a ceiling, so no more than 5% could be used for any other purpose. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And traditionally, the 5% is only used for the city's administrative fees and administering the tax.
Thank you. Any other general questions, comments, Michelle?
I see we have another appeals section in here that we will need to look at and make sure it's updated to our new format with the 14 days and that, since it,
That it's consistent with
consistent with the other appeals sections.
Yes, please do that. Thank you. Any other comments or questions on the remainder of this chapter? All right. I think we will conclude that. That takes us to the miscellaneous section. Does staff have any other announcements?
Only about the homework.
Okay. There will be no homework this month.
That's a nice announcement.
What's the explanation?
Okay, so, at the last code review task force meeting, this group, talked about getting our staff edits before the homework is assigned, instead of during the, agenda packet process. And so for us to be able to get staff the time to prepare that ahead of time before it comes out in the homework, we're gonna skip a month. And then, of new homework, we will bring back all the changes from, the two sections that we reviewed tonight for a final recommendation. And then we'll kind of start with that new process with the new homework. And that way you'll be able to see that in preview that at a sooner date. And hopefully that will help with some of the confusion, especially some of the codes have some pretty severe changes when we're reorganizing everything, and it can be hard to follow. So we thought that might be helpful, and for us to be able to do that, we just gotta give staff a little time to get ahead of it.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Yeah, fine.
And thank you for all the hard work that the staff puts in. We really appreciate it. The next code review task force meeting will be May 25th, 2022, at 5:30 PM here in the council chambers. Meetings will typically held on the last Wednesday of the night of each month in 2022. Hopefully the weather will be nice. If there are no other additional items, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you for being with us. All right.